You're listening to the MindPod Network. My sweet Audible friends, you can support the It's All Happening podcast by heading over to zachleary.com and using the Amazon portal to buy your stuff, or head on over to iTunes and leave this podcast a glowing review. It's all happening. 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 It's all Hello, friends, my sweet Audible listener friends. Welcome to the podcast, episode 118 of the It's All Happening with Zach Leary podcast. That's me. I'm your host, and this is the show. We've done 118 episodes of this together, and I think I'm feeling that I'm just starting to get the hang of it. And my observation and reflection on that thought is that's a really positive thing to feel at this stage in the game. So with that said, this week on the podcast, we have Deepak Chopra. How exciting is that, right? Needless to say, what an honor it is to sit down with Deepak and be in his presence and to have a conversation, to do a podcast about cool spiritual stuff, scientific stuff, deep dives into the nature of the universe and why we're all here in the first place. So we'll get into it with Deepak in just a little bit. But first, we're going to talk about a couple of films that are on Netflix. And I think it's very appropriate for this podcast because I am of the belief that Deepak Chopra is one of the great embodiments of rational, applicable, yet inspiring doorways into the spiritual experience. I think because of Deepak's success in bringing Eastern mysticism and fusing it with Western ideals and Western medical practices as well, has created a very, very unique paradigm. And as we discuss these two films on Netflix and what they represent, I think you'll see how it all works together. Currently streaming on Netflix right now are two films about the spiritual and religious experience and how that can morph into rabid phenomena that makes up the very fabric of the American idea of religious experience and how that plays out. It's of how well-intentioned seekers can get so caught up in the institutional ego of their beliefs that the ideas that they thought were once righteous quickly spiral into wild-eyed tales of greed, judgment, and even violence in the case of the first film. And that film is called Wild Wild Country, and it is a very ambitious 6-part documentary that does a deep dive into the inner workings and the stranger than fiction drama that played out when Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh, otherwise known as Osho, and his devotees decided to set up camp in Oregon and build from the ground up their utopian dream complex. And when I say build from the ground up, they built from the ground up. This ranch was basically dead land that couldn't be used for harvest or for let alone sustainable living. But through the power of and unity of these devotees, they transformed the land into this magical environment that certainly became something worth fighting for. However, when they started fighting for it, when they started realizing the human implications, the human fallibilities of anything that is created and becomes a symbol of institutional faith or institutional religion, that symbol of the institution must interact with the outside world. And these guys did not want to play nice with the outside world. And the way that they chose to find the middle ground and to find a solution is absolutely mind-blowing. You must see it to believe it. I think faith, when left unchecked, or faith as it relates to the individual experience and how that inspires him or her, and that, little kernel of inspiration, that hit that you get from your own experience, when that's combined with the agenda of the institution that represents your faith, things can get very, very, very murky. And that's also seen in the second film, which is called Come Sunday. And I'm sorry I said it was a documentary, because it's very much not. But it's about the story of Carlton Pearson, who was an African-American Pentecostal preacher, who still is actually, from Tulsa, Oklahoma, who was raised in very traditional Pentecostal roots and very traditional Pentecostal environments, and the amazing American phenomenon that is. If you haven't checked out any hardcore Pentecostal preaching and music, do it. It's, if nothing else, very entertaining. He was a preacher who then went to Oral Roberts University and became an actual student and sort of an adopted son of Oral Roberts himself. And because of the implications of race and religion that went on there, Reverend Pearson went on to start one of the first integrated megachurches in Oklahoma. And as this church grew and Reverend Pearson's fame exploded into the national spotlight, he became inspired by the Word of God, encouraged by the Word of God, I should say, to rethink the Pentecostal position on the relationship between heaven and hell and the individual, to rethink the idea, the implication that just because somebody hasn't been indoctrinated into the church in a formal sense, and they haven't, formally accepted Jesus Christ as their Lord and Savior in front of clergy, that they aren't necessarily condemned to hell for all eternity. And that these kids starving in Africa, victims of war-torn genocide, that they too were eligible to receive the love of Jesus Christ in the afterlife. And as he preached this, as from the pulpit deep inside the belly of this megachurch, it was met with outrage. He was labeled a heretic. His church took about a year to unravel. He was dismissed from the official association that regulates Pentecostal bishops, and he went on to go do his own thing. And his commitment to his faith and to his beliefs, even as the brute force of the institution that he knew and loved that brought him up was in his face, breathing fire, he stuck to his heart and came out the other side in a beautiful, beautiful way. Again, those two films are called Wild Wild Country and Come Sunday, both streaming on Netflix. So on the podcast this week, we are very honored to have Deepak Chopra as this week's guest, and I want to give a big shout out to Shelly Karpati and Saran Sound for helping to facilitate the complicated dance that is getting an in-person podcast with Deepak Chopra. I'm so grateful for his time and his energy and his graciousness and presence of spirit. It was beautiful to spend a little bit of time with him at the Chopra Center in Carlsbad, California. Deepak is, of course, one of the most influential voices of the modern spiritual movement taking form in American culture. His wisdom, knowledge, heart, and insight has inspired millions of people to cultivate their own spiritual practice and healthy lifestyle. He's sold millions of books, written many, many books, counseled presidents, hangs out at the Vatican, and he's been a go-to source of wisdom for how Eastern mysticism and Western science can blend together to form a blueprint for an ideal state of living. Once again, spending time with Deepak was such an honor and a privilege. I really enjoyed his company and his wisdom. And I hope you enjoyed this podcast as much as I did. Here we go with Deepak Chopra. Deepak Chopra, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Zach.
It's really a pleasure to be here. So there's so many places, so many angles to go with you. Where I wanted to begin is one of my favorite, or I should say, one of these parts that I really relate with you so much, and I'm so fascinated by the work you do, is the merging of West and East. Like that space, that sweet spot where West and East sort of meet and collide to form, I don't know if it's a new paradigm for healing or wellness or consciousness or awareness, but you occupy what I think is a unique space in where West and East meet. Do you think, is there a way, do you have maybe a formal point of view or sort of position on what's great about Eastern methodologies in West and how you bring it all together?
Yes. Right now, the Western worldview is shaped by what we call physicalism or materialism. Mm-hmm. It wasn't like that. It's only since the last 500 years that this view has evolved with what we call the scientific revolution. So first there was the cognitive revolution 60,000 years ago when humans started to imagine and tell stories, initially all religious stories.
Right.
But then there was the agricultural revolution 12,000 years ago, and then about 500 years ago, only 500,
yes,
with Copernicus and then Galileo and, Isaac Newton and the European Enlightenment and then the philosophical movement.
And then the Industrial Revolution.
And the Industrial Revolution, we gradually moved from what was essentially a mystical and then a religious worldview into a physical, materialistic worldview. And because science is so successful, we've come a long way in those 500 years. Before Galileo was looking at the stars, and now we talk about 2 trillion galaxies, 700 sextillion stars, uncountable trillions of planets.
A lot of data.
And I've just returned from the Vatican, where they had a conference on stem cells and biohacking and digital understanding of biology and CRISPR and gene editing, where you can read the barcode of a gene and selectively delete
what isn't working,
a gene and paste a new gene. So it's been a very successful adventure, yes, the scientific adventure. But what it has lost is it has replaced a model of reality for what reality is. Because any good scientist will tell you that science doesn't look at reality. It looks at models, human models or constructs of reality, whether they're mathematical constructs or physics constructs, or however we want to term science, mathematics, science, biology,
yes,
astronomy. What these sciences have done very successfully is create very efficient maps of what we think reality is. But in the process, they've also sacrificed a very major question, which is, where are these constructs coming from?
Right.
So before I can call this a flower, I'm looking at a flower right now.
Yes.
That's a construct which I was indoctrinated into as a child. As a child, all you see is a shape, a color.
Right.
You feel a texture. You maybe experience a smell,
right,
or a sound. But then the rest is a story. And the best story, most successful story right now is science. It creates planes and internet and everything else.
And like this, we're told the flower's beautiful. As a child, we're led to believe, oh, flowers are beautiful.
Yeah,
like we put them in the room just to make it pretty.
But as a child, you were bathed in a chaotic world of color, sound, taste, smell, texture. And you were part of that experience. There was no separation between you, the flower, and what we call a star, a galaxy, a tree, or another person. The use of language and is the symbolic representation of reality, but it does separate the observer from the observed.
Yes.
Okay. Thought separates the observer from the observed, the seer from the scenery, whatever, the knower from the known. Reality is one, and it's a chaotic and beautiful expression of joy, love, connectivity, which leads to things like compassion, empathy, but also leads to a kind of an intoxication of experience, which is oneness. So in sacrificing consciousness for a model of reality, we have, in a sense, the religious traditions say, what does it do for a man to gain the whole world but lose his soul? What we have done is sacrifice ourselves for our selfie, in a way.
Right.
The selfie, this image of me, and then this image of the other, when it's all actually one blissful movement dance.
So what is it about the human condition, and like you're talking about the scientific campaign being so successful in the last, and it's been radically successful,
and it should be that way.
But why do we need to know? What is it about us that needs to know, to have it figured out?
So knowing is how consciousness knows itself. Consciousness knows itself as this taste and this color, which I now call it a flower.
Yes.
Or this body, which I say is mine. Or this hand, which is mine. But consciousness is the knowing element in every experience. And human consciousness, I think we're, going away from strict Darwinian interpretation of reality. I think we are a species of consciousness. In the same way, a butterfly is another species of consciousness, or an insect with 10 eyes is another, multiple eyes is another species of consciousness. And consciousness itself is all modes of knowing, all modes of experience in every species of consciousness. So I don't know what the world looks like to an insect with multiple eyes.
Right.
Or what's the experience of a snake that navigates through infrared. Right. But I do know that entity is having an experience. In fact, we call it a biological species, but that entity is a sentient being having its own universe. Now, there's some crossover. I once mentioned to Mr. Obama, your dog Bo doesn't know that you're the president of the country or that he's sitting in the White House.
It's indifferent.
Those are human constructs.
Right.
But there's a relationship. So consciousness has leaky margins. It's personal, it's transpersonal, it's trans-species, and ultimately it's universal. And the rest is all, like branches coming from one infinite reservoir of pure consciousness. The need to know is there in every species.
So you think so? You think the need to know is inherent to every species, or is that something just unique to the human?
I think the need to know is inherent, but in other species, the knowing only assures survival. In us, it goes way beyond that. Now, we create art and cathedrals and temples and music,
shrines to our
knowing,
right.
And we also ask ourselves, who is it that knows what it knows, or what is it that wants to know? And in this adventure of creating constructs, we build a human universe. We don't realize that stars and galaxies and gluons and quarks and gravitational fields and elements and forces are not things unto themselves. They are human constructs for modes of knowing and experience in human consciousness.
Yes.
And then we sacrifice the map for the territory. In a convenient way. I mean, we think we have a mind, a body, and there's a universe. But these are also constructs. In reality, there's only consciousness having an experience. Right. The rest is a story. And in our case, it's a human story.
So, shifting that just a little bit to the idea of perhaps not knowing or unknowing, or sort of being content in the mystery. And in my experience, I'm just reflecting my experience, not my knowledge, but in my experience, especially in Eastern practices, like meditation for one. I mean, I could talk about many methods, but let's say meditation. The more you meditate, the more I sort of have this lovely comfort that, oh, I don't really know how any of this is working, but here I am anyway, and I'm okay with that. And it takes away some of this absolutism that comes from the scientific revolution and takes me just to, okay, I have this relationship with consciousness, but I don't know how it really works, and it's not my job to really know how it works. And it's kind of just embracing the beauty of the unknown. And that's just one thing that I get from meditation. But so do you think like these Eastern methods or these Eastern methodologies or myths were sort of, they embraced a lot more of the unknown than we see today? I mean, ancient yogis are mystics, they're seers, they're...
So one phrase that comes to mind is, all knowledge is ignorance. That's from the Vedanta, all knowledge is ignorance.
Right.
Because what you have done is you've sacrificed the absolute for a relative knowing, which is very provisional. So all knowing is provisional. I am Deepak Chopra. What does that mean to start with? You know, it's an image created around a story which is shifting. Deepak was a boy, a toddler, an infant, an older person, and so on. That particular entity will be dead and gone as an experience. So every identity we have and everything that we experience as a knowing is provisional, but it has its role, right? We created money. There was no such thing. We created Wall Street. There's no such thing. We created the stock market. There's no such thing.
Right.
We created latitude, longitude, stars, galaxies. These are human constructs for modes of knowing and experience. But they've made our life very convenient. You're recording me in a gizmo, and some people are hearing it on their computer or wherever. Yeah. But it's a great adventure that human consciousness has taken. It's a very promising adventure. It's a very exciting adventure. It's a very dangerous and risky adventure because it could lead to our extinction. So as long as we recognize that every knowing is provisional, both of who am I and what I know is provisional, then not knowing is the absolute surrender to mystery, because there is only mystery. There's no explanation for existence, period. And there is no explanation for the awareness or consciousness of existence, period. Now, when you go and talk to all these smart people, Stephen Hawking or whatever, he's gone, but others of that stature, they'll talk about the Big Bang, they'll talk about eternal inflation, cosmic inflation, multiverse theories, 10 to the power of 500 universes, M theory. All these theories, by the way, are in consciousness, string theory.
Yes.
They're in consciousness. But right now, where we are with science science has become metaphysics, because none of these theories is subject to what is called validation or falsifiability. One of the tenets of science is I should be able to design an experiment around a theory which either validates or falsifies.
Proving it.
Prove it or disprove it.
Or disprove it, right.
Well, an observer-independent universe is not possible to prove or disprove, because the observer is there in every experience, including the experience of doing science.
Okay.
Furthermore, when we go to the Big Bang theories and all the cosmological theories that go to Planck time, there's no time when you get there. So actually,
time is another construct.
Time is another construct.
Yes.
When you get to Planck scale, 10 to the power of minus 43 seconds, there's no space, there's no time, there's no energy, there's no information, there's only possibilities, and even that is theoretical. So actually, the current cosmological theories are unprovable and non-falsifiable. And yet they're taken for granted as being true because they fit mathematical constructs without asking where did the mathematics originate, if not in consciousness. So, where science is taking us now at the edge, it'll jump into the same place where mysticism has always been there. It's a mystery. Surrender to the mystery.
And that makes me wonder why more scientists aren't so mystical.
The good ones are. The good scientists are. But when you pin down scientists, I have now talked to the best scientists in the world.
Sure.
Doesn't matter who they are.
Yeah.
When you pin them down, including now Andre Linde, who's the celebrated author of Multiverse and Eternal Inflation, he will tell you what we observe is not reality. What we observe is our perceptions, and our perceptions are in consciousness, period. So everything that we are looking at is a model of reality, not reality. And yes, it is fun to create these models. It's a human privilege to create these models. And if you remember their models, that the ultimate mystery is unexplainable, then what that does is, to me, it does two things. One is it creates reverence for existence, and two, it creates humility for the scientists, so that the scientists can even be more bold in their imagination.
I know you can't speak for Mr. Obama, but you've been there, and contextually speaking, you've bore witness to a situation like that. And I've never been with a president in the White House, but when you're in the middle of a situation that is quite surreal, and you see somebody like that having this experience, playing this role, that whether it's a construct or it's not a construct, doesn't matter. The role is infused with some kind of inherent power. To me, that creates this imbalance, because you have somebody like that who is, a lot of people think he is speaking of reality. Do you think, I know you can't speak for him, but do you think he was aware of that?
Not sure. He took his role very seriously, and justifiably so.
Yes.
He was hijacked by, I would say, the politicians of Washington, D.C. area, who are all mafia. I think all the whole political system is run by gangsters and mobsters. They're called leaders.
Right.
But that's a very big tragedy of our times. Obama was not that. He was surrounded, though, by gangsters. And so, in my view, he was ambushed and hijacked, and therefore not as effective as he could be. But we have created these power structures in our society, and we don't realize we are living in an insane asylum. If the world is not insane, I don't know what else we could call it. Climate change, extinction of species, war, terrorism, mechanized death, poison in the food chain, on and on. You could easily keep going on. This is total insanity. And this is because our scientific progress has not kept pace with our spiritual evolution, which is embracing the mystery of existence, having reverence for existence, deep humility, and understanding that here we are having an experience, and we don't even know how we have this experience.
So, and I couldn't agree more with everything that you just said, and that picture you just painted. Here we are sitting at the Chopra Center, which is, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it's an environment, an ecosystem that you've created and authored to promote, encourage self-inquiry and healing, and taking care of, this vessel that we reside in, both mentally, spiritually, and physically as well. Why is that important?
I think, first of all, I don't know how the center happened. It just happened. I was sharing my ideas and writing books and studying Vedanta, and then with the help of other people, this happened. But it is definitely an oasis that people come for healing. Healing is a very interesting word. Healing, holy, wholeness, health. Healing is the return of the memory of wholeness, which is not, I'm not just a body-mind. I'm actually the mystery of the entire universe, having the experience of a body-mind. And when people surrender to that experience through many avenues, whether it's through, meditation or through other experiences that they have, even experimentally through hallucinogens, or they fall in love, or they have a deep unity experience, they feel whole, they feel holy, they feel healed.
Yes. They feel healed, and just the sensation of feeling healed, even if it's temporary, makes you maybe a more responsible, compassionate
this is
human,
where
right?
the understanding of consciousness is very important.
Right.
If everything we use with words is a construct for a mode of knowing an experience, then your body is also a human construct. There's no such thing. Even that which we call the mind is a construct. All there is consciousness having intermittent experiences of sensations, images, feelings, thoughts generated in consciousness, known in consciousness, made out of consciousness. That's all there is. Once you realize that, then even birth and death are constructs. So you're free.
Free from birth. So for somebody... And
as they say, what happens to you when you die? I say, well, I was never born.
Or you get born again.
Everything recycles.
Recycles over and over and over again. For somebody who is perhaps newer on the spiritual path, I know the work that you do covers so many different demographics and so many different types of people, young, old, affluent, not as affluent, whatever, presidents, Vaticans, hippies like me who come and do podcasts with you, all sorts of people. For people who aren't as maybe, entrenched in the spiritual path, what's your intro sort of for getting people to understand this consciousness
My
thing?
intro has always been physical health is...
Physical health?
Yeah, people start with that, and then emotional, and then, they want intellectual understanding. But in the end, you have to go beyond all of that and say, who you are, who you really are, is infinite, and you're having an experience that is finite. Our life is a dream. Western philosophers have said that. Wittgenstein said, our life is a dream, we are asleep. But once in a while, we wake up enough to know that we're dreaming. So if I ask you what happened to this morning, it's a dream. What happened to yesterday, it's a dream. What happened to 5 minutes ago, it's a dream. What's now? It's a lucid dream. You need to wake up from the lucid dream to know who you really are, and then you realize that you're the infinite being having a finite experience.
But some things within these lucid dreams we still need to whether or not they're constructs or not, we still have to fix them. Like in the healing self, you were in the beginning of the book talking about the dissemination of viruses, and we live in a much smaller world.
So, we are having a human experience, and we have to deal with it. Okay. So as long as we are having a human experience, we deal with it. But I think what happens with spiritual experiences, the melodrama is not there anymore. You can enjoy the dream and upgrade it too. Right now it's a nightmare. Collectively it's a nightmare.
And I know our time is limited, so for one more question. Collectively, perhaps it is a nightmare. But through all of these healing, let's just talk about the physical, forget the spiritual for a second, especially around things like immune deficiencies and viruses and diseases and stuff like that. What's the biggest obstacle with creating healing for every individual on the planet in the future? Because I don't always think this way, but sometimes I feel like this dystopia, like only people who are affluent are going to be able to get access to all the latest technology and clean medicine and water, and in the future, that's going to be an issue. So I'm wondering, what's the solution?
The solution ultimately is spiritual, because as long as we are living in the construct of a metaphysical material reality, then those who can grab more will grab more of matter. But once you realize that inseparability of existence, as the Buddha said, the cause of all suffering is the hallucination of the separate self. Once that goes, then, whether it will happen or not, I don't know, but you need a critical mass of people who are aware of awareness. And if you have that, then today we have the technologies to tackle every problem that you've mentioned, whether it's climate change or extinction of species or good access to health everywhere in the world. But unless we keep pace with our spiritual evolution, it won't happen. We have a choice right now, either healing or extinction.
That's always my frustration, is that because you look around, we have the solutions.
Yes, we do.
We do, right? And we're just not disseminating them.
Well, this is a moment of choice. Either heal or extinct. Last extinction was 65 million years ago.
Right.
We could be the agent of the next extinction. I don't want to go there. Let's take the other road. The road less traveled, as they say.